Today in this video, we're going to be covering how to install a fence from scratch. And that's going to be including installing the 3 rails and the fence pickets themselves. Now, the first thing you need to do is set where your rails are going to be in relation to your post. So what I'm doing here is I'm just taking a level to make sure I'm level, and I'm going to draw a line where my rails are going to set. Now, I have a pre-existing fence, so I'm just following that same rail mark. But if you don't have a pre-existing fence, then what you can do is follow this diagram right here. Typically, the top rail is going to set anywhere between 3 inches below that top of the post. So all you have to do is measure 3 inches down from the top of the post, mark a straight line, and then take your rail, measure the width, and that is exactly where your rail would rest if you don't have that guideline. So once you've marked where your rails are going to set on your post, what I'm doing here is I'm just drilling a screw right below that line. That way, if you're installing the rails yourself, I could have something to set my rail on, while I'm installing it. If you have somebody, you don't have to do that. Then I'm taking a level and I'm just going to make sure that rail is level the whole way through before I go ahead and I decide to slide over to the other side carefully, making sure it's level the whole way through. And I'm going to take a Sharpie and I'm going to mark again on this side as well, so I can have a guide mark on this side. Then once I do that, with my rail in place, I'm going to screw 4-inch screws, 2 on each side of the rail. So each rail is going to get a total of 4 screws in total. And I'm using 4-inch screws because it's really going to get deep into the rail and into the post. Now I'm going to make sure that it's level right after I do the first screw, just in case I have to make an adjustment. I don't have to unscrew a bunch of screws, and slowing the process down. And once you do that, you're pretty much going to do this for the bottom rail, repeat the process for the bottom rail and the mid-level rail as well. We went ahead and we installed all the rails. So the main thing is when you want to line them up, halfway with the posts that you have when we go to install that other rail, because the other rail is going to rest halfway, as 2 nails are going to go in each one as it goes across to the other post. So we have everything lined up. We made sure that everything's level with a leveler. I do also want to mention, when you're installing the rails on the corners, remember how I mentioned you want to rest them halfway? Well, that's only if you're installing the fence in the middle. When you get to the corners, your rail, you want to take it all the way down to the very end of this post. You don't want to rest it halfway, and the reason being is because this rail right here is going to go all the way, and it's going to be on this side of the post. This rail, however, it's going to go all the way, but it's going to be resting on this front side of the post, so they're not going to touch. That's why you can take them all the way. So after you went ahead and you installed your 3 rails, you're now ready to install the fence picket. The first thing you want to do when installing that first fence picket is you want to make sure it's level. That way you're not installing it at any slant. And I'm not leaving gaps between my fence pickets. So once this first fence picket is level, all I have to do to make sure all the other ones are level is just leave no gap and run it all the way up against the other picket. It's going to leave natural gaps because wood is never cut to the exact dimensions, and also when wood gets wet, it could also tend to shrink. So just keep that in mind. Now, all I used was 1 5/8 inch exterior screws, and what I'm doing is I am digging these pickets a little bit underground to have them align perfectly, and I don't want to leave any gap under the rail because the homeowner doesn't want any snakes or rodents going under. Now, this is somewhat of a controversy to some people. Some people might disagree and say this will lead to wood rot quicker. However, wood will get rot regardless of what you really do with it. It's not really meant to be wet or withstand a lot of rain, and in Florida you're going to get a lot of hurricanes and rain regardless. So for here, she's more concerned about the privacy and not allowing any rodents or anything. Now, to make sure your panels, your pickets are aligned with one another, what I'm doing here is I just aligned up the corners, as you saw there with the fence picket. So pretty much your fence pickets on the top, they're going to have an angle that cuts. Once that angle begins to cut, that corner is what you're going to line up to make sure each fence picket stays in line and straight the whole way down. Now, if you don't have a pre-existing fence like I did, refer back to that same diagram I showed you earlier, and your fence pickets should be around 7 inches above the top of your post. And that's pretty much all there is to it, to building a fence from scratch. You're going to repeat that same process, matching up the pickets by the corners, screwing 6 screws per picket, 2 in each rail. Now, this was a 2-day job. As you can see, I had to finish it the next day because it started to get dark. So here's me finishing it the next day. Now, I just want to mention, now, how many posts do you need if you're installing a whole fence? Right here, I'm just replacing a fence. You're going to have every 95 inches, so every, 8 feet or so, you're going to have a new post. So that's when you'll install a new post, and you'll start the next set of rails, and then you'll repeat the process the whole way down. And this is the final result right here. You guys can see we went ahead and packed the soil back at the bottom. That way, everything is level. And pretty much all the panels are level up top. We're getting 2 screws, remember, each fence picket in the middle and at the bottom. So a total of 6 per panel. So if you doing the math, all you have to do is times 6 by the amount of panels you're using. Here it is, how it looks on the side. And we're gonna go ahead and work our way to the other end. That way you guys can see from this angle. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned how to install your fence from scratch. It's pretty easy, in my opinion, once you learn how to do it and learn the measurements. Now, if you haven't installed your fence post yet, then you might want to click this video right here to learn how to install your fence post before you obviously install your fence.